Hello, and welcome to the Coach Right podcast, where we explore how to turn coaching expertise into published pages. I'm your host, Helen O'Neill, portfolio career specialist, accredited future of work coach, author and creator of Coach Right 90, the writing programme specifically designed for coaches. You can get the episode show notes and your free guide to publishing options at coachright.co.uk. It's time for the next chapter. Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of the Coach Right podcast. I'm your host, Helen O'Neill, recording on Saturday the 30th of August, 2025. Now, I don't know about you, but I love a good list. I find the process of getting everything out of my head and onto a piece of paper incredibly cathartic. And then there's the deep satisfaction of ticking things off when they're done, only to completely disregard everything that's been achieved and create a new list. Many of the clients I work with in my coaching practice have or aspire to portfolio careers, meaning they have multiple streams of income. Some of them balance traditional employed work with a side hustle. Others hold a senior fractional role or run their own business. What unites them is the desire and drive to do multiple things, and it won't come as a surprise that to thrive in a portfolio career, you need to be organised. It can be all too easy to jump from project to initiative, from one to-do list to the next, all without considering or celebrating the work that's been done. Time management is as much about how we choose to spend our time as it is about the boundaries we create so we can enjoy it. It never ceases to amaze me how busy the quiet month of August is, and that has definitely been true for me. As I reflect over the priority projects I've been focusing on outside of one-to-one coaching, this month I'm reminded to pause and take stock. Firstly, the Coach Right podcast is something I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I'm delighted to have brought you the first 2 episodes. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do and be the first to hear how coaches from all disciplines went about writing and publishing their books. We land on the first and third Wednesday of the month. And for those of you that are thinking, I'm a coach and I'd like to write a book, there's still time to join the September cohort of Coach Right 90, where we'll take you from idea to manuscript. The link is in the show notes, and if you're listening in the future, that will take you to the waitlist for the next group. Writing-wise, this year's Plan Your Portfolio Planner is finished and published. I created this last year because as a portfolio professional myself, I just couldn't find a planner where I could do all of my thinking, and I much prefer to do that away from a screen. Turns out a lot of other people do too, so if that's you, you can grab your copy on Amazon. I've also been working on my next non-fiction title, which I'm fondly referring to as The Resilience Book. I've added around 10,000 words this month, so I'm sitting at around 25,000 all in all. I normally write from start to finish, but this one's becoming a bit more of a patchwork, so I'm interested to see what editing has in store. As I say all of this, my humility is sitting on my shoulder, making me wonder if it sounds a bit, look at all the stuff. But of course, a lot of the work has taken way longer than 1 month. It just so happens that August has been a month of delivery. And maybe that's the thing I take away from this reflection, that it's a finishing month for me, ready for a new list of things to achieve after the celebration. So if you haven't already, I encourage you to spend some time reflecting on your achievements this month. I'd love to hear how you got on. All this talk about organisation and planning brings me very neatly to today's guest, Paul Holbrook, founder of Diary Detox and author of What Are You Doing? The Uncomfortable Truth About How You Waste Your Time at Work. As well as how to organise your book and your project team, Paul and I discuss tools, purpose, and debate whether you need a page all about you in your book. Paul is incredibly generous with his learnings from writing and publishing his book, and I'm sure that you'll get a lot out of today's conversation. It was a really fun one to record. So without further ado, here's the show. Welcome to the Coach Right podcast. My guest today is Paul Holbrook. Paul spent 20 years in change management in the city before turning his back on the fat paycheck and walking away. Tired of watching the toxic effects people's diaries were having on them and those around them, he created Diary Detox with a simple purpose: to create a world of better-led people. He's the author of What Are You Doing? The Uncomfortable Truth About How You Waste Your Time at Work. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Really good to have you here. So tell us about you and your coaching practice.
Oh, wow. So I'm Paul Holbrook, 53 years old, about a week ago. I just had my birthday. I'm a husband to my wife, Emma, father of William. My son's just graduated from university, and my stepdaughter, Lucy, who's just doing her A-levels. I live in the Cotswolds. Like you said there, I was 20 years in the City of London, and I was always really frustrated about how managers never really seem to have enough time to do the one thing that managers should be doing, especially in technology and especially in financial services. And that was managing. They just never seem to have enough time to do it, especially when they work for me. So having got completely fed up of hearing them say this, I went on a bit of a journey of thinking, well, I can see that what you're doing isn't what you should be doing, but how do I get you to see it for yourself? Eventually, I left and created Diary Detox Limited, which was supposed to be a coaching practice. And one of the biggest objections that I would get from potential clients was, Paul, it all sounds great. There's only one problem. I don't have any time. And that completely resonated with the story that I would hear from managers who used to work for me in the city. And so I took some of the techniques that I created in the city to help deal with that and created the Diary Detox method. And really, to start with, it was a bit of an objection handler. It was, how do I get people to see that actually, yes, they are busy, but they're probably busy doing things they shouldn't be doing. And that's what led to the Diary Detox method.
Amazing. And then what led from the Diary Detox method into that becoming a
book? So originally, my business wasn't called Diary Detox. It was called Tripodicus Limited.
Oh, that phrase off the tongue.
And it really doesn't. It was quite a while that my accountants realised one day that my business wasn't called Tripodicus, and it was actually called Tripodicus. But part of the reason for the Tripodicus was because tripod was my nickname at school. It wasn't for the reason that you're thinking, and it wasn't for photography. It was just because I was very tall. And then I got working with a lady called Rachel Savage, because when I started my business, even though I knew what I did and how I did it and who I did it for, etc., I was really bad at saying it, at telling other people and getting them to kind of understand it. And so I met a lady called Rachel Savage. She's my brand storyteller. And she helped me go on a journey of understanding what I do, how I do it, but in a slightly different way, almost from the client's point of view, which was a way that I'd always struggled to get it out. And at the end of the first session of, I think it was about 4 sessions that we did, and I still work with her today, 8 years later. But at the end of the first session, she turned around to me and she said, Paul, you know there's a book in this, don't you? And I kind of went, is there? And she said, oh yeah, absolutely. And so it was Rachel that really told me that there was a book in this. And once even though when I came out of the city, I kind of left it behind and said, I don't want to go anywhere near that again. One of the things that Rachel's process helped me to understand is that although I hated what the city had become, the city was the very place that probably needed this most. And so even though I'd started my business with smaller businesses in mind, I then realized that actually to create a world of better led people, you've got to go back to that place that told you the story that it was really broken. And I didn't want to leave all those people behind, the ones that I'd originally set the business up for. So What Are You Doing? The Uncomfortable Truth About How You Waste Time at Work was basically a way of not leaving those people behind, writing the book for them so that I can then go off and work with corporates without feeling guilty that I'd left behind the people I'd set the business up for.
Amazing. It's always great, isn't it, when someone just casually throws at you, like, oh yeah, you can just write a book about that, like it's a 15-minute job.
Well, the thing is, they do it. So I was going to say that they do say that everybody has a book in them, and I mean, I got a D in GCSE English the first time I took it because I was much more mathematical and musical. And I'd love to have thought I could write a book, but I never would have believed I would have written a book one day. And so when Rachel said those kind of fateful words, it was kind of, oh wow, what, people would be interested in this? And she said, oh yeah, totally, absolutely. So yeah, it's nice to have kind of finally achieved that goal, I suppose. And it's a great way of getting introduced to people by giving them a copy of the book.
100%. So how do you go from this kind of kernel of an idea that's been planted in you to write this book to a finished manuscript? Talk us through your process.
Okay. Um, well, to start with, I mean, the diary detox method itself, I kind of knew, and sometimes when I do what I do, people will sometimes say, "So this diary, do you actually do it yourself?" And I always have to say, "Well, yeah, of course. I'm the reason I created Diary Detox is because this is how I think. I didn't create this as a way of just selling business and selling books. So this was kind of my logical way of processing how to prioritize, structure, and manage time. That's kind of what it was. So I knew what it was. I knew what the process was and how it hung together. And I just started to write. And actually, I wrote a heck of a lot in a very, very short period of time. Let's say I probably got about, I mean, the book's only 10,000 words, but I got probably about 8 or 9,000 words out in a week or 2 weeks. It just flowed. But it wasn't really palatable. It wasn't the kind of thing that you'd read and think, well, yeah, somebody could do something with that. It almost felt like a bit too much of a narrative and a bit too much of a story. Whereas what I felt it needed to be was a bit more of a process as well. There had to be some interesting bits, but actually, how do you now use this? How do I actually make it work? And so I got a bit stuck. And interestingly, because I got stuck, I started to procrastinate. And they do say that if you're procrastinating, it's one of three things. Either because whatever it is you're trying to do is either difficult, it's uncertain, it's scary, or it's tedious. And for me, it was uncertain. I just thought, I don't really know what's going on. I've got some words down, but I don't know how to take it to the next level. And then I don't remember who it was. I think somebody must have said something to me that made me kind of flip back to something that I used to do when I was in the city. And what I really like to do, it was kind of like how I would create a presentation. So when I create a presentation, I usually start off with, let's say, one page. And that one page is, what do I want people to go away from this presentation thinking, feeling, doing differently than when they come into this presentation? And it's just a real simple kind of high level view of what do I want to achieve with this? Once I'd done that, I would go down to the next level and say, well, let's assume I've got 3 slides in which to do that. What would I put as a heading for each of those 3 slides? And if it's 3, great. If it's 5, then maybe it needs to be 5. And then I go down to the next level of, okay, so for those 3 slides, what are the 3 to 5 bullet points that I would want to have on each of those slides? And I decided to kind of think about the book in that way. And in Microsoft Word, which is where I was writing the book, I really like a view called outline view. An outline view allows you to kind of shrink down all of the detail and just be left with the kind of title of the book. And at the next level, you've got the 3 to 5 kind of chapter headings, let's call it. And then underneath that, you've got the 3 to 5 sections underneath that and so on. So I was able to kind of create this structure. And I'm a very structured thinker. My background was mathematics. And so when I read that, and I could literally shrink down all the levels and say, does that structure at that level make sense? Yes, it does. Great. Does the structure at that level make sense? Yes, it does. And then the next level down. And then eventually, when you get to the bottom, you go, okay, well, all I've got to really do then is just put the last bit, the words, into each of the section headings within each of the chapters, etc., etc. And that was game changing for me because it made it less of a mountain to climb. It was like little baby steps. And I thought, well, I've only got to write like 3 paragraphs on that. That's really easy to do. So you write down 3 paragraphs, then go down to the next one, collapse that away so I don't see all the noise, and then write the 3 paragraphs. And it just started to take form. And actually, once I'd realized that, that's when it really I mean, I finished it really quite quickly after that, in a matter of maybe a couple, 3 more weeks. So I suppose I wrote the book. Um, I always assumed that I would self-publish it. And if I'm going too deep for you, just let me know,
Oh,
and
no. This is
I'll
all the
let you
good
ask me some
stuff.
questions. Okay, cool. So that was kind of the kind of what I call the difficult bit, which
Yeah.
was getting it down on paper. Um, I always knew that I'd want to self-publish it, probably because I just wasn't confident in trying to sell it to a publisher, I suppose. And I had have a very good friend, Richard Hadley, who lives in Santa Monica in Los Angeles. He's English, and his wife, Gabriella, she was an aspiring book editor. And so
Handy.
she was very, very, an ex-lawyer, so she's really good at the detail. And then she said, "Would you like me to edit it for you? I'll do it for free." And I went,
Amazing.
"Wow, yes," because she wanted to do it for kind of experience, so that she could build up her portfolio. So she did that, and I found that quite easy actually. It was a bit daunting, kind of sending off your manuscript.
Mm,
This baby that you've created, and nobody wants to be told that their baby's ugly.
no.
But I sent this thing off, and as somebody who is a self-confessed not very good at English back in my kind of day, and giving it to a lawyer who's obviously very clever. um, but she was incredibly gentle, incredibly generous, and she was brilliant. It wasn't proofreading. She was actually looking at it and saying, okay, this didn't really make a lot of sense to me in this way. What about if you move that around? And because we had that kind of trusting relationship, that made the process really easy for me to kind of take that feedback, because historically I wasn't somebody that was very good at taking feedback. Um, so she edited it for me. I made a bit of a mistake at the end. I actually made a few changes after she'd done the final edit, and she wasn't very happy with me
Oh,
for it, because there were probably a couple of little mistakes in the book. And of course, I've written in it that Gabriella edited it. So I had to go back, cap in hand, saying, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." But she said, "It's fine, don't worry, you're good." So, tip to everybody: don't change your manuscript when your editors signed it off. Just don't do it. It's just not the done thing. Um, so that was that. In terms of typesetting it, um, I was just introduced to somebody. I can't even remember how I was introduced to the lady at Spurwing. So it's a company called Spurwing Creative. It's one lady, and she's does all kinds of things. She's like a web designer and so on, and she's also done typesetting and book and things like that. So I was introduced to her. I gave her the manuscripts, and she typeset it for me into a PDF document. And that worked really well. It was actually really quite cheap, actually, compared to what I thought it was going to be. And she basically got it to a point where I could upload it to KDP, which for Amazon,
yeah.
so that it was print on demand. And yeah, that was kind of in a really, really small nutshell. That was kind of the end-to-end process for me. Um, it was a lot simpler than I expected it to be. I think when you get past some of the terminology, some of the jargon around
Mm.
typesetting and that stuff, and I've got no idea, but it's actually it's not rocket science. Um, and yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's done pretty well over the years. It's been a great way of um, two things really. One of them was actually kind of giving it out as a kind of an introduction. One of my biggest clients I had, I literally did a podcast like this with them. I invited them to a podcast with me, and as a gift, I gave it to them
No.
to say thank you. And as a result of that, they read it and said, "Wow, this is brilliant. Can you come and do some work with us?" And it was like, "That's not what I meant to do, but great."
Yeah.
um, it's a really lovely thing to give people the gift of a book, even though it's I've sold quite a few copies of it and stuff. So yeah, in a nutshell, nuts.
Amazing. There's a few things in there that I think are really important to call out. The first thing that you talked about
Mm,
is being really clear about why you're writing the book. So you talked about your not
yeah,
wanting to leave people behind, and actually having something that is accessible to people who would be your client, but for whatever reason aren't, be that financial or logistical reasons, but still having a way to help
yeah,
those people is so, so important. But of course, then there's the ancillary benefits of actually it's a marketing tool as well. And actually you found that through your process that it wasn't your purpose to do that, but actually it's a benefit that you've reaped anyway. Um, And the other thing I
Absolutely.
really liked about what you just talked about is how important it is to surround yourself with the right team when you're self-publishing. I think sometimes people think it's just you and your laptop and hoping for the best with spell check, but actually the value of having professional support people for your editing, for your cover design, for your formatting is so key. So the fact that you managed to find those people first time round, if you could tell us all the rest of us how to do that, that'd be amazing. So,
It was complete utter luck, right? And it's all about just creating relationships with people. But I would say that there was part of the team that I got wrong. And it wasn't anybody I paid. I remember as I was in the process of writing it, and remember I said I got this point where I started to procrastinate because I got so far and then I kind of stalled a little bit. And I remember somebody, I think I noticed somewhere, somebody was running a speaker workshop or a speaker kind of panel discussion. And they had three or four different people, somebody who'd written one, someone who is writing one, someone who is a book publisher, and so on. And I don't know whether this was right or wrong. Um, I, I personally have reflected on this, and I think it was wrong to have suggested this, if I'm honest. But I'll put it out there for your listeners and for you to decide for yourself. And I'd be really interested to get your thoughts. But as I stalled, I kind of spoke about, this lady says, "Oh, well, so what are the kind of section headings you got in there at the moment?" And I kind of told her. And it was very clear that one of the section headings was talking about where did this thing come from? Where did this idea, what was the story behind it? And, there was quite a large part of it that basically told the story about how I'd stumbled across this thing when I was working in the City of London. And she turned around to me in this thing and she just said, "Why are you doing that? Why is that in there?" And I said, "Well, I just thought it'd be really important before you ask people to kind of trust you and go on a journey to do something that you've created, is give them a bit of a sense about where it's come from. It's almost like provenance. Yeah, you wouldn't eat food and think, well, who's made it? I mean, is it hygienic and so on." This is the thing I think was wrong, but I don't know. You tell me. She said, "Paul, nobody cares about your story. All they care is about their story." And so at that moment, I cut that whole part out of the book. And in hindsight, there have been moments where I've thought about doing a second edition because the method has evolved a little bit. There's some bits that weren't there before that have now appeared, and it won't change from where it is now. And I've thought about writing a second edition, and I've, if and when I do that, I'm absolutely going to put that story back in there about where did this thing come from? What was the story? What was the founding story of where this whole thing came from? But I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
interesting. So, actually, as you were saying that, I went back to your analogy about writing a presentation. So when you do a presentation to a new group of people, there's normally an introduction slide at the beginning to explain who you are or who the
Mm,
team is. And I often used to call that the "who the hell am I and why should you listen to me" slide. And so
exactly.
there is something in that within books. But actually what I would say from a general perspective is it sort of depends on where your book sits in the market. So I write self-help, for example, and it's really common to have a story or an about section that tells you why the book exists, because actually
Yeah.
people are looking for that narrative. They want to know that you know what they're going through in order to be able to trust that you can help them. You don't always get that with all kinds of non-fiction books. So for me, it's making sure that you're
Yeah.
aligning to reader expectations and delivering on that. So that for me, it depends.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that now a large part of what I do, when a company first comes to me and says, we put a bit of a challenge, what can you do to help? A large part of it is about insight generation.
Mm,
You're trying to get the organization or the people in the organization to understand quite how big a problem they have. Because often they think they have a problem with time, but they don't really know how big that problem is. And so I go and do something with them called a discovery. And what's interesting is the very, very first part of the discovery is in three parts. The first part is, who am I and why the hell should you listen to this? It's basically telling the story about how I created this and giving an example. And then once they've had that, which only takes about 10 minutes, let's say, it's then, And that realization that person had came from just a really simple conversation, which is a conversation I want to have with you. And then you go into the second part, which is basically where you get them to do exactly the same thing, but for themselves. And then there's another part which talks about why it happens and so on. So it does feel naturally correct to do that now because it's become such a fundamental part of my discoveries. Why wouldn't that be part of the second edition of the book? So that's really useful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's one of the delights of being self-published, isn't it? You can choose make your own decisions.
Absolutely.
So what else did you learn during the process that surprised you?
Well, one of the things I learnt, well, like I said, was how simple it is to write a book if you don't overcomplicate it. Yeah, but you can massively overcomplicate it. And that's what I meant about, having this really clear structure and just finding a way that works for you, writing it in a way that works. I don't think there's a one single way that everybody can write. So I learned that. I learned, like I said, it was a very, very powerful marketing tool. I think I also learned that if you gift somebody a copy of your book, they look at you like you've just paid their mortgage off. It's weird. You kind of say, thank you. Would you like a copy of my book? And they kind of go, really? It's like, seriously, it costs about £10. And you don't say that, but even though it doesn't cost a huge amount, of course, you're giving them the gift of your knowledge. And it's amazing the effect that can have on people when you give them something that they really weren't expecting. So I learned that. I learned that you get some good advice and maybe some not so good advice. I learned that there is no right answer. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
And if you look for perfect, you'll never publish it. You really won't. You've got to draw a line in the sand and say, look, this is where I wanted to get to. I can always do a second edition if I really, really need to. In fact, I've updated the edition. So when I first created Diary Detox, it's all based around 5 colours. And when I first created the Diary Detox, one of the colours didn't exist, and that now exists, which is why I think that's worthy of it becoming a second edition. But one of the colours of the original 4 colours was actually a different colour. So I have this thing called, we have these colours. Green is for leading, amber is for managing, red is for doing in terms of how you use your time. And we used to have brown is for floating. And it was very specifically brown for floating because brown stuff that floats is, I will not swear for your listeners. But then what happened probably around about a year after I published the book is I realized that I needed to change the color because when I started talking about brown, of course, brown stuff that is floating is waste. But actually that stuff wasn't always waste. Sometimes it was just that it either wasn't adding any value or you weren't sure if it was adding any value. And so it was a grey area. And so that's at the time where somebody turned to me, well, have you thought about changing the colour to grey instead of brown? It was like, that's a really great idea. So the other thing that I learned is that, like I say, it isn't perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to issue a second edition. You could just do an updated colour edition, let's say, and nothing else really changes in the book. It's just making sure that it's up to date with what's going on within the underlying product and stuff. What else did I learn? I think I learned that there are a lot of people out there that really, really want to write a book. And they gravitate towards you because it's like, wow, you've written a book. How did you do that? And it was like, I just found my way. That there's really there's no magic formula. Well, there probably is a magic formula, but I didn't know what it was, and I got away without having to have it. Those are the only things I can think of that I learned throughout that.
It's really useful. And you used Word to write it. What other tools or technology did you use?
Well, there were other top technologies that were used, but I wouldn't necessarily have used them. So Claire at Spurwing, she would have obviously used Photoshop for all the kind of cover design and things like that. obviously you've got the KDP platform within Amazon. Um, I then did turn it into an audiobook as well,
Oh, did
and the Kindle
you?
book.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, so the Kindle book was relative. It was a little bit tricky. So you can't really take the PDF that you put on KDP and use it for Kindle. And I think I just did a look on the internet and I just said, hey, how do I take a PDF and turn it into something that I can put on Kindle? And there was a tool, I can't remember what it was called now. If I can remember it, I'll let you know and you can put it in the show notes. But it would basically import a PDF for you, and then it would do all the little bits you needed so that it could be put into Kindle.
Mhm.
Um, so I used that as well. And like I said, I turned it into an audiobook as well. I've
Did
actually,
you
so I
record it
basically,
yourself?
and I did record it myself. Yeah,
Oh,
why wouldn't
amazing.
I? Yeah.
I know, why
Um,
not?
so, so, I wish I knew I was going to be talking to this level about this because I'd have done a little bit of research before I came on so I could give you all the stuff. So, in terms of doing that, all I really did was I used GarageBand
Yeah.
on my Mac to record it. I already had a pretty good microphone, but to tell you the truth, you can get away with so much at the moment with some of the great kit we have now, even though it's like really rather cheap. So I had a digital mic. I had it plugged into GarageBand. Um, I made I made these.
Oh, you made a sound wall. I love that.
So a sound wall. So I basically just bought these kind of like 20 or 30 of these things. This is actually the second incarnation of it. The first incarnation, I actually glued them to the inside of a massive cardboard box so
Yeah.
that the edges folded in and they folded over. And I literally sat here. I mean, you can't see me because you're not doing this via video, but I literally crouched down on my desk with the microphone however far away from me in this kind of box. I was sweating profusely at this time when I was doing this, and I recorded it that way. I've done a little bit of sound editing in the pod, nothing really kind of hyper technical, but I kind of understood the principles of it. So I would just take out all of the hissing noise and take out all the gaps that didn't need to be there, and the clicky
Yes.
tongues and the things like that, which are really annoying. Um, so I did that myself, just recorded it as an MP3, and then I went onto the ACX platform, which was Amazon's audio recording platform, and basically created an audio book the same way as you do it in KDP for a printed platform. And that was quite good actually, and it worked really well. And yeah, it's really odd that some people will say, "My goodness, it's very, very weird having you talking to me in my car." But yeah, I really enjoyed doing that as well. It was quite a nice journey. But another thing that I will try and find out and I'll share with you that you can maybe share in the show notes as well is that I watched a YouTube clip. There was one guy and he had recorded his own audiobook. And he basically, it was like a 15-minute video, and he said, here are all the do's and don'ts. And he had like a configuration file for GarageBand. He had this, he had that. I recommend you do this. It was really, really handy. So if I can find that, I'll share that
Yeah,
with
for
you
sure.
because it gave a really nice kind of bassy feel to it. It wasn't very tinny. I wonder if mine was maybe a little bit too bassy, but go buy it, find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. Absolutely. So it sounds like you learned loads a lot along the way. What advice have you got to
Yeah.
coaches who are aspiring to write a book?
Well, there's one tool. It's really interesting because I don't think of it as a tool, but it is massively a tool. Um, and that's the work that I did with Rachel. So Rachel runs a company called Brand New Story, and what was amazing about Rachel, it's so weird, at the beginning of this podcast, you said, "Hey, Paul, when I introduce you, I'm going to use these words." And I thought to myself, "Oh no, but if those words don't match the words that I now use," and of course, as you read it out, I thought, "No, they don't completely match, but they are pretty much it." And the reason is because both of those things have been taken from my brand story. They are the things that Rachel helped me to create, and the back of the book was taken from my brand story. The part of the introduction was taken from my brand story, and that was hugely powerful because it made it very clear who it is I'm talking to, why it is I'm talking to them. A key part of the work you do with Rachel is one of the things she asks you, and I don't mean she just asks you and you tell her, she helps you figure out what's the story in the world that you're seeking to change? And asking those questions really gives you a huge amount of clarity about who you're talking to, why you're talking to them, what transformation journey you want to go on, and why that's really important. And whenever there was a moment where I thought to myself, oh, now I'm going to have to think about how I word this, I would just go to my brand story. It was probably there somewhere in the middle of it. So one of the things I would say, you don't necessarily have to go and work with Rachel, although I would hugely recommend her. Be massively clear on the kind of stuff that I got from my brand story. Who's it for? Why are you doing it? What's the story in the world that you're seeking to change? Because that will give you so much inspiration throughout writing. It's that having that clarity is really important. So I'd say definitely have that. Don't worry too much about technology. That there's not a lot you need to know as long as you've got Google Docs or Word. Outline view worked for me, and so that was the best thing. And don't try to have everything planned out in advance, right? Don't think, well, I can't start writing this until I know who's going to edit it. It doesn't matter. Until you've written it, there's nothing to edit. So there's no point in knowing who's going to edit it. If you know them in advance, great. I mean, that's fantastic. But just don't get ahead of yourself. They talk about when people are overwhelmed, they just say, break it down into small steps. Just do that bit first. Even if it comes down to writing the manuscript, just write the introduction, if that's what you want to do. Or for me, it was just write the high level section headings. Does that make sense? Yes. And then do the next step and then the next step. Don't try and get too far ahead of yourself. There's no time frame. Don't put yourself under pressure. I mean, if you need to put yourself under pressure, then great, please do. Having a deadline. I didn't need to have a deadline. I think if I had created one, it probably would have gone against me more than it would have helped me. But I know that I'm one person. That's how it works for me. And I'll tell you what, I would use LinkedIn. I would share with the world that you are writing a book, and just reach out to your LinkedIn. I mean, the number of posts I've done that they start with the words, please help LinkedIn. And I will just say, I'm writing a book right now, or I want to do X, Y, Z. This is what I'm doing. Has anybody got any suggestions on people that I could talk to, or anybody that I could meet, or whatever else it is? Just create that network. When you said to me, I was lucky I found the editor and I found the person who did the typesetting and stuff. I just did that because I told my sister I was doing it. She said, well, my web designer does book editing. And I went, oh, great. And if you don't tell people you're doing it, you try and keep it all under wraps, nobody's going to know, and you won't get the benefit of all of their wisdom. So, yeah, to tell the whole world, it creates that kind of sense of anticipation that, wow, you're going to be writing it. For some, that might be the accountability you need to actually go and finish it, because you've said to people you're going to do it. Yeah. Well, then you better get on and do it then. So, yeah, that's probably what I would say. And the reason I would say that is because, just very quickly, I was down in Cornwall a couple of weeks ago, and in this little village where we have a holiday cottage that we rent out, every Wednesday night they have choir night. And choir night is basically the male voice choir. They all go out and do their choir kind of practice session. And at about 9:30 in the evening, they all come back into the local pub and they sing for the locals. And it's really lovely. And you have a drink and you chat to people. The reason this is important is because one of the guys, he's a real character, bold chap. And he came over and we were just chatting. And he was telling me about all these origins of phrases, and it was really interesting. And I said, where did you get all this from? He said, I'm publishing a book. And I went, really? Oh, wow. When's it coming out? And he went, well, I have been writing it for about 10 years. Yeah. And it was very clear that he'd stalled. Yeah. And there were a couple of little bits that he really wasn't clear on. Now, because of that, I was able to say to him, have you thought about this? And he went, no, I haven't. He's like, and have you thought about this? And he said, no, I haven't. And I said, right, here's my number. Give me your number. I said, I really want to read this book, because he's getting on. He's in his like mid-80s, I think he is. So it's like, I would hate for anything to ever happen to you and the world not get to read this book, which is absolutely fascinating. And so I said, if you want me to, I'll hold you accountable. Nice. I'll send you a message and I'll just say, how's it going? And no pressure. Just tell me how it's going. And if you're stuck, just ask me, and I'll help you think a way of maybe getting the next little step down the thing. So that's probably the last one I'd say, which just came to me then, which is get an accountability partner, somebody who you feel accountable to, who is generous and who's going to do it in a really, really nice way. Because when you're doing it for somebody else, not just yourself, I think it tends to give you a little bit of a kick up the bum when you need it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So my last question, before we share where people can find you, is you talked about a second edition, but would you write another one?
What another second edition or another
So
book?
not a second edition, another book.
I absolutely would write another book, but the drive in me would have to be very, very clear. There are two books that I say two, it may be one. It's two different ideas, but that might come together in one book. And those two, those two books, one is around. I have a particular bugbear when it comes to the development of leaders within organizations. I worked in technology within financial services, and it was appalling. There was so much money spent on leadership, and yet, 270 billion a year is spent on leadership development, and we don't have any more real leaders, I think, today than we've had over the last 20 odd years. And I think that's because everybody thinks that the answer is leadership training. And it's like, but we're already spending so much on leadership training, so that can't be the answer. And I don't think it is. I think it's actually that there are four pillars to creating great leaders, and training is the third pillar. And unless you get the first two right, you just don't bother. And I think that's really what's happening, which is the first pillar is you've got to have the right people doing it. It's like, it's no point in me sending you on a course to be a car mechanic if you, Helen, have no interest in cars.
Yeah,
because you'll never use the thing. Right? Okay. So I think there's something to be said around how do we select the right people for management and then hopefully leadership. The second pillar is actually around alignment. So often we select the right people for management, but then an organization will set targets around these people that actually disincentivize them from doing that management. It is the most crazy thing. And if you think about this to the third part, which is the skills, you could send loads of people on courses, but if you've got the wrong people and you're misaligning them, that training will never ever get used. And then there's another one at the end, which is around belief. So I think there's something around that I think could be really powerful as a way of changing people's perceptions on how you create leaders. The second idea, which the more I speak about it, the more it feels like it's probably two parts of the same book, is I think there's an opportunity to use a word in leadership that a lot of us would probably feel very uncomfortable about, but I think it would be more powerful, and that's the word love. Creating leaders who lead with love. And we keep using this concept of leading with kindness or, nice leaders. And it just feels a little bit too soft. It's like, well, kindness, lots of people think that kindness is about, well, I know you're not doing a very good job, but don't worry, I'll protect you. And it's like, no, that's not what we need. Sometimes, if your child was struggling with something, you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, yeah, well, we'll just let you get away with it. Don't worry. No, if you love them, if you really believe in them, then you will help them understand what's working and what's not working. And so there's a word love that isn't used enough. And I had a really fascinating conversation with a guy one day because a lot of people started to get really uncomfortable about me using the word love in the context of leadership. And it was a specific demographic usually. It was usually pale, stale, white males, basically, were the people that were saying, oh, how does that word love play out in this? And it's like, well, it'll play out the way it needs to play out. If you don't like the word love, then you're probably not going to like working with me. So it was like a really interesting disqualifier. But one guy did exactly the same thing, a guy called John Doonan, and I thought he was going to suggest that I stop using the word love. And he said, no, I'm not going to suggest you stop using the word love. He said, but here's a perspective. He said, the Greek language, depending on which text you look at, either has 6, 7, or 8 words for the word love. He said, what I'm going to suggest you do is you go and have a look at each of those words and see if they offer you something as a way of making people who would naturally be probably quite uncomfortable with the word love, being comfortable with the word love. and it was game changing for me. There were six words. Three of them were wholly inappropriate, like obsessive, flirtatious love and things like that. But there were three that were huge. I won't pronounce them because I'll get them wrong. But they were love of the wider world, which was about having a vision, having an understanding of a story in the world that you're seeking to change. One of them was about familial love, and you'd extend that to the love of the team. So treating your team as if they were your family and as if you cared about them. And sometimes making somebody redundant who is wholly not suited to your team is the most loving thing that you can do, not just for you, not just for the rest of the team, but for them as well. And then the last one was compassionate self-love, which is one that is just so underdone. You know, if you can't look after yourself, how on earth can you be in a place to look after other people? So I think there's something around leadership, leading with love, and thinking about this stuff differently.
They
If there
both
is
sound
another
like
book,
books to me.
that'll be okay. So maybe there's two. Thanks for that, Helen. You've really just made my life a lot
I think we'll be
harder.
watching this space, Paul. What were you saying about accountability? I think we've got that right now.
Yeah.
That has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so
Oh, I'm
much for
glad.
sharing all of your insight. Please, can you tell listeners where they can find you, your services, and your books online?
Yeah, sure. So to find me, you've got two options. If you're looking for stuff around Diary Detox, then it's diarydetox.com, all one word. If you're interested in looking at me from a speaking point of view at conferences or away days, then I've got a speaker site. This is paulholbrook.com. That's HOLBROOK.com, all one word. In terms of my services, that's probably where you come to Diary Detox, I suppose. In terms of where you can find my book, you can find my book in three places, and I pretty much already mentioned them. You can find them on Amazon as a paperback. It's on demand, so if you order it, it'll probably arrive to you within about 2 or 3 days. On Kindle, you can get it there, and then obviously you can get it on ACX, so on Audible. That's also where you'll find it, and it's called What Are You Doing? Some conjecture about how you say that, and it's from the author. This is how you say it. It's what are you doing? The uncomfortable truth of how you waste time at work.
Fantastic. Paul, thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining me today. You can get the show notes and your free guide to publishing options at coachwright.co.uk. Remember to subscribe and leave a review on your podcatcher of choice. Your words can make a difference. A review can too. If you'd like to connect, find me on LinkedIn, O'Neill Helen, that's O'Neill, Oneill, or on Instagram at Helen O'Neill Coaching. I'll see you for the next chapter of Coach Right.